Jo Swinson, over to you. Please tell us what your reflections are, Jo.
Sure. Well, I mean, when I was Minister for Women, what really hit home to me was the way just all of these different issues are so interconnected. So they often were getting addressed in silos, like you'd have a debate about the gender pay gap, you'd have a separate debate about women's pensions and a different one about confidence of girls at school and a different one about violence. And of course, these are all absolutely intertwined. And that's why in tackling the problem, there isn't some silver bullet. It is about tackling all of it and about people across different industries, different professions, different age groups, all doing their bit to try to make change where they can, because there's just frankly so much to do. And you know, I did feel the weight of responsibility a little bit as the Minister for Women, where you're trying to solve gender equality with or inequality with 50 civil servants and a tiny budget, compared to the other things that I was doing, like consumer rights, which was important in my role as a business minister, but which had far more resource than what was allocated to the gender issues. So. But one of the things that really struck me was how invisible the gender inequality is, which sounds like a strange thing to say because we all see it. But even then, the way that we see it, we sometimes say to ourselves, well, I'm just imagining it. Oh, well, no, that obviously isn't really the case. And it isn't obvious quite what the extent of that inequality is. And it can even be surprising to hardened feminists when you actually see those numbers in black and white. And I wanted to share, just as an example, a Twitter exchange that I saw. And it was a couple of people who were in America who were working as editors of people's CVs for a company, Marty and Nicole. And Marty tweets, so one day I'm emailing a client back and forth about his resume, and he is just being impossible. Rude, dismissive, ignoring my questions. Anyway, I was getting sick of this shit when, I can say that now that, Catherine, you've, broken the barrier there. I was getting sick of his shit when I noticed something. Thanks to our shared inbox, I'd been signing all communications as Nicole. So they had a bit of a chat about this, and they decided to do an experiment where they basically, for a week, they swapped inboxes, and Marty signed his messages as Nicole, and Nicole signed hers as Marty. And there'd been a kind of issue within the company where Nicole had been under pressure because apparently she hadn't been working as hard and getting as much done. And anyway, he continues the story and says, I was in hell. Everything I asked or suggested was questioned. Clients I could do in my sleep were condescending. One asked if I was single. Nicole had the most productive week of her career. I realized the reason she took longer is because she had to convince clients to respect her. And I just thought that was, it was a really nice, neat example of something which we all sort of feel, but it's often hard to put your finger on. It's hard to be really clear that it would be done differently if you were a man, but you kind of get that feeling that it's probably the case. But all too often, it's very hard to prove or to be certain. And of course, for men, even, the very many lovely men who are kind of feminists and equality, they don't even understand the true extent of their privilege in a similar way that, I have to be really conscious of my white privilege and think about that, because it's not something which I'm being confronted with every single day. I'm experiencing it in blissful ignorance. So I think that invisibility is one of the reasons why transparency is so incredibly important, and why the gender pay gap reporting, again, it's not a silver bullet, but it really has sparked that conversation at board level about something which is crucial. And I think that the pay and the money is important, it's part of the value, but it's also about that respect. And it's about all of those different issues. And the gender pay gap is quite interesting because it is a proxy for lots of things. It's, it incorporates all of that inequality about, mothers having children. And of course, because of the intersectionality of the different pay gaps, again, if you're collecting those figures, you can start to analyse the different groups within the workforce as well and see whether there are double disadvantages. And I'm sure there generally are in most organisations. It's a proxy for whether women are being promoted as much, or whether they're being, held at a certain job for just a few more years because, they have to prove again their worth and that they would be good, whereas a man is more likely to be promoted on potential. So the transparency really is important because it forces us to confront it, but it is vital that we use that information to ask questions. And that's where I think everybody can do something. We can ask questions of our own organisations, our own employers. People will obviously feel, there will be some people who feel more empowered to do that, and there might be some people in some circumstances where that doesn't feel like something which is that you're in a position to do. But we're also all consumers. So you can also ask about the situation in other companies to whom you spend money at, and do that publicly, because that information is out there and in the public domain. And that accountability is important. And I just wanted to say there's two reactions that organisations or individuals tend to have when they're confronted with this kind of, bleak assessment of quite how bad the situation is. And both of them are reactions of horror. And I'm sure Carrie's experienced these, and Sam, from the different people that they spoke to about their cases. One is of horror, as in, oh my goodness, this is what we're doing. This is atrocious. I can't believe this was the case, because it is subconscious. It is often unintentional. I do not believe there was a great PwC report into pay equality at the BBC, where it sort of said, there is no evidence of, systemic, pay inequality between men and women. I mean, I thought, what are you expecting to find? A little huddle of people in a room somewhere going, how can we pay the women less? That's just not how it works. It is the assumptions that people have in their minds when they're thinking, so what is a fair amount for this person to be paid, that just mean that women tend to get less. It's not some kind of intentional plot, generally. So you have that sort of horror, and how can I put it right, which, it's not great if that problem's there in the first place, but at least if you get that kind of good horror response, then you can make some progress. And, that is something. But then you also get the other horror response, which I think was summed up by John Humphreys and John Sopel's conversation, which we all heard. And I did just kind of love the schadenfreude of that. As a politician, you're always worried about microphones still being on, and sometimes people do get caught out. But there was something just quite nice about that. But it just basically showed it's that horror of how dare she? How dare she challenge this? How dare she think that she's worth that? Is the subtext of that horror reaction. And there is far too much still of that. And it didn't surprise me that that exists in the BBC. And that BBC Women and the organisation, I think, has been fantastic at really, furthering these issues. But those women journalists who themselves are not always in those positions of power in their organisation and trying to challenge it, but again, getting fobbed off. And so for those kind of dinosaurs, I think they absolutely have to be called out and challenged. And I remember at the time, there was various women MPs saying, well, I'm going to boycott John Humphreys and not go on the Today programme and be interviewed by him. And I just thought, well, do you know what would be even better? Is to just go on and to ask him about it. It is live radio after all. What are they going to do? Cut it out. I'm not expecting to have a very pleasant next interview with John Humphreys, but I do think that challenging is really important, because those attitudes are still prevalent, and again, they are too often invisible because the microphone is not always on. Thank you.